Hi, I'm Darryl Pidcock, Head of Asia Pacific and Cyber for Perils Group. I think it's an interesting time. I mean, what we're observing, and certainly what in terms of where we're interacting with across the industry, I think there's quite a focus at the moment on, I would say, the non-peak perils. So not your typical earthquake or typhoon, of course very important for certain markets. But as we see in the US, convective storms, I think in this part of the world, flooding, well known. Even, for example, hail. For example, we're seeing after this year some quite significant hail storms in Japan, which is unusual. So, very much I think is understanding those perils. I think that the other thing is clearly there's a lot of development going on. I mean, great examples, of course, in Southeast Asia, and South Asia, such as India, manufacturing, urbanization, but insurance also still quite low, or relatively low. So I think the critical challenge where we're at is one thing to look at it from the perils, but also to understand those exposures and how they're growing and what they're going to look like in the next 5-10 years as well. So this does also come back to what data is available, and then secondly, of course, the modelling and understanding of risk. But I think the frequency of events in these perils, in these sort of non-peak, I call non-peak perils, is really critical, and you can feel it and coming up in many discussions during SIRC. We're trying gradually over time to expand our coverage. So at the moment, Australia, New Zealand and Japan that we do cover. And I think to share those examples, even arguably in those markets where data is available in some form, but looking at as you mentioned, industry exposure and industry sort of loss data after an event, it's still not widely available. And I think so part of our role is to come in, work especially with the primary insurers, where we really rely upon them to provide their exposure data and post-event claims data for these events, and then importantly I think make it back available to the wider industries through reinsurers, brokers, modelling vendors, also capacity providers such as the ILS funds. So I think we're trying to bridge that gap. I think the next part of it is, of course, there are many markets where there may be still challenges to get that exposure data at the moment. But I really see some progress happening. I mean, India is a good example at the moment, where we're seeing the quality of data, what's available, both private and public sector, parts of Southeast Asia. So a lot of it involves collaboration and for us interacting, and then trying to provide at least some form of exposure loss information back. And there's different ways we can do that. I mean, frankly, everything we do is really based on that feedback. Of course, we're always looking at what's important for the industry, but where does that come from? It comes back from interacting, talking to the industry. The primary insurers that we do work with closely, they continually give us feedback, and often directors. But I think even engaging like this week at SIRC with the reinsurers and the brokers and the vendors as well, continually getting feedback of, can you do this, can you do that, what about this? And I think that's where we take it away. Maybe can't do everything, but when we start to pick up themes that this is important, then we will work on it and try and offer something. I think it's well documented. It's still relatively low penetration, and really across the whole Asia Pacific region. I'm coming from Australia. I look at Japan. There is some penetration, but you look at even those markets, especially in the SME segment, very low. But I think the but bit is that you see this week there's actually quite a contingent from the cyber community here, which I've not seen in past years, having come here many times. And I think that reflects that there are views that Asia, whilst low penetration over the next 5-10 years, it has the potential to grow, which means exposures have grown. The attacks are already happening, and I think that's also to bear in mind that really across the region, as these attacks increase, the need for the insurance industry to be able to fill that gap, especially not just the corporate sector but the SME, because again, many markets in Asia, SME is really critical part of the economy. I don't want to wish a major event to happen, but I think even not from a malicious attack point of view, but you look at the recent CrowdStrike, which was an accidental, but the impact affected the globe. Many really weren't talking about that sort of event, which really is an accident. It's not a typical attack or ransomware. But now the industry's now, refocusing a bit about, well, what does this mean? Because this sort of event, if it happens again, can happen and really impact anywhere within the region. So I think this is where Asia, it's, yes, relatively small compared to US or Europe, but the growth is there, so it means we have to already be putting attention to it.